I'm Mike Kelly from Project Healing Waters Omaha, and uh, tonight we're going to kind of build on the theme that John had from a couple weeks ago, where he tied two similar flies that were kind of tied in the same way, but if you change a few attributes, you've got different flies, but it's the same basic bodies. Basically, this is tied the same way, but it's a different wing. It's the sparkle dun and the X-Caddis. Before we get started, though, on next Thursday, the 14th, um, again, we'll have a very special guest, Phil Rowley. Um, I think I talked about this last week, but he grew up in British Columbia and now lives near Edmonton. Um, he's going to do a presentation where he ties about 3 or 4 of his favorite stillwater flies. And the way it sounded like in our discussions was that he was going to try to have a little bit of focus on other species other than trout, but he's mostly a trout fisherman. But think about questions you may have about any stillwater fishing, any fly fishing, fly tying questions. He's tied flies for many years. He's done um, several different types of patterns. So if you have any fly fishing questions at all, just kind of jot a couple down, and then you'll have them ready to when there's an opportunity. It's a really good um, opportunity to speak to somebody who's really experienced and really has a good reputation in the fly fishing community. So that'll be a great presentation, I'm sure. And then that following Tuesday, I told you guys wrong a couple weeks ago. Um, the 19th is when I'll be doing the presentation for Fly Fishers International. Um, it's every first and third Tuesday. If anybody came in last Tuesday, they had some problems, but those problems have been resolved. And so by next Tuesday, they should have that all cleared up. Tuesday the 19th, I should say. Um, it's open to anyone, and they cover techniques and fundamentals. But the part I like is a lot of discussion back and forth with some very experienced fly fishermen from all over the country. Sometimes there's people from other countries, but because of the time differences and everything, sometimes they can't come in. Um, but that'll be, if anybody has any time on Tuesday evening, um, let me know and I'll send you the link and the time and all that kind of information. Um, we won't be meeting on Thursday, the Thanksgiving Thursday. So on the 21st of November, we'll have, is that right? Yeah, I think it's the 21st of November. We'll have Paul Fidelis. And then that'll basically wrap up November. Um, so tonight, I'm going to switch to the Vice camera. Oop, I'm already on the Vice camera. Hang on a second. There we go. This is the beginning of the chain of flies that are all basically tied the same way. This was called the haystack, and it was designed by Fran Betters in 1949, actually during his senior year in high school. There's some discussion about whether his dad also fished a fly similar to this, or but the actual haystack tied this way um, is attributed to Fran Betters in 1949. Um, he was a Catskill. He lived in, that area, the Catskills. Um, a lot of the flies in those days were like the quill Gordon, the red quill. There's a lot of Catskill style flies that uh, were very sparse. The hackle was very um, like sparse by a lot of the Western flies. But if you look at the front of this, the wing actually kind of sets down. It's like about 180-degree wing. So that's what helps float the front of that on the water, and then the tail helps float the back of the fly. Um, so this was basically to take the style of the English flies and the delicate Catskill style flies and make a fly that could actually survive some real fast water. Some of the Catskill rivers had some really, especially some of the freestone streams had, pretty fast current. And he designed this for rivers like the Au Sable and some of the rivers that had a little bit faster current. So one of his signature things was an orange thread. That's why I have orange thread for the head. It's basically dubbing deer hair for a tail and deer hair for a wing. Um, this is done by stacking the deer hair, and he didn't do that. A lot of the haystack flies that were tied in those days were basically hand stacked, uh, maybe a little bit longer of a wing. Um, but that's kind of where it all started. Then in the 70s, let me grab the Comparadun. Um, this was done by Cauchy and Nastasi. I don't know their first names. It's basically the same fly, deer hair wing, again, fanned out 180 degrees. But the tail is the one I did this one. I don't know if you can see those microfibbits. It's basically like if Paul is on, I don't know if he made it, brush fibers. Um, those are nylon brush fibers, basically. You could also use something like Coq de Leon, some real long, stiff, let's zoom out a little bit here, real long, stiff tackle fibers that are speckled, work really good on a fly like this. Whiting has some Coq de Leon as well. But this was, again, in the 1970s, and this it's still to this day a very popular fly. It really represents the tails of a mayfly, how they ride on the water. And then the first one we're going to do is the Sparkle Dun. Now, in the early 80s, Craig Matthews and John Jurasek came up with this fly while they were fishing on the Henry's Fork of the Snake River. They were fishing, they had trouble with some really selective trout. And they actually laid on the bank and kind of watched over the edge and watched huge rainbows come up and actually select the pale morning duns that were floating down the river. It's a big hatch, but they weren't able to get anything on their normal flies. And so they watched them grabbing the duns that were trapped in their trailing shucks as they were emerging from the water. sometimes they get like a leg or like their tail or a wing stuck in the trailing shuck, and they're basically like crippled on the water, and they'll either lay on their side or um, just kind of float along with their trailing shuck hanging off the back, and they can't fly away like that. They can't break the meniscus, the surface of the water, and fly away. So what they did was they then added the Zelon is what they were originally tied with. This is Antron, very similar material, but they tied a trailing shuck of Zelon on the back of basically the Comparadun instead of the tail that it had, the split tail. And so that's what we're going to start with. The key to, we got a chat in there. Oh, Larry said he'd be right back. The key to the Comparadun is having the right hair. And so I'm going to switch to the other camera here. So there's all kinds of deer hair out there that you can buy packaged. Here's this, says X-Caddis deer, stimulator deer. I have a few other deer patches here. And basically the key is, I'm going to grab a little sticky note here. I'm going to try to do it on this camera. This hair right here is beautiful. It's a glossy, beautiful brown color. And it's short hair. And I thought this would be great for tying these. But move it right there. Basically what you need for, especially for the smaller flies, is you need hair that's, I guess the best way to describe it is the stuff that's crinkly and thick, because you need to flare that wing. So this hair right here would be great for tails. It'd be great for wings that you don't want to flare. But right there, if you look at a few of these hairs against that sticky note, it's very, very fine, fine hair. And there's no pith in the middle of that hair. It's just very, very fine. It's almost like, I don't know, it's very wiry. This has a little bit more thickness to the hair. I've used this a lot for like a blue-winged olive. This is a gray dyed deer hair. In a little bit larger sizes, this would do probably 12, 10, in bigger sizes like.
Hey, Mike, could you move it up?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
I'm looking at it. I'm looking at my hands, but I can't really look at the camera at the same time. So thank you for that. But basically, you want a little bit of this crinkly stuff to be toward the tips on the smaller flies. This stuff I've used for like green drakes, stuff like that, where it's a little bit bigger of a fly. Anything smaller than like a 12 or a 14, and maybe this gray stuff wouldn't be appropriate. Ironically, this stimulator deer, it's dark here toward the tips, but it does have some crinkly, this midsection right here. So basically, this lighter colored stuff down here is the stuff that's crinkly and thick and has that pithy center. It's not necessarily hollow, but that's the kind of stuff that makes that hair flare to where you can get a good wing. So that's what I'm going to use. For the body, I'm going to use this super fine dubbing. And for the tail or the trailing shuck, I'm going to use Antron yarn. This is a rust color, and I use this for just about everything. I use it for a rusty spinner, for tying spinner flies. But it's a real good, darker color to use for that trailing shuck. So I'm gonna move this over and switch to the camera. So I'm doing this in, I believe this is the 14, 12. I think this is the 12. I'm going to use an olive thread and put on my glasses. So this is a very fine thread, so I'm just going to start it at the eye. And I'm going to lay down a thread base all the way back to the end of the shank. Now, then I want to advance it forward to about the halfway point. Then I'm going to tie in this trailing shuck. And I have a piece of that Antron. I'm going to make it a little bit longer hanging off the back than what I think it should be, because I'll cut that later. And I'm going to tie that along the top of the shank. Like that. And then I'll cut away the remainder. I'll actually use that on the next fly. Now, for the trailing shuck, when I've seen Craig Matthews tie this a few times, and he ties it, he cuts it square like that. And I just, that bothers me. There's nothing square in nature. And the trailing shuck is definitely not square on the end. So I like to just kind of cut it with a little bit of a angle, and even kind of twist it up a little bit. The trailing shuck is basically the outer shell of that insect. And so something like that, even with these little things hanging off the back, I mean, maybe that's a little bit too much. That might get caught around the bend of the hook when I'm casting it. But you just want it to be a little bit uneven and kind of scraggly. And then we're going to come forward and actually tie in the wing. So I'm not tying in hackle. Again, as you can see on the, here it is. Use on the other one that I tied here. That wing's pretty far forward. There's no hackle. Basically, the wing is what floats it on the surface. And one thing, if you happen to notice as you're fishing that the fish are keying on the duns that are laying on their side, you can grab this wing and just compress it like that. And then when you cast it out there, the weight of that wing is just going to make it lay on its side anyway. So it's going to look like a dun that's trapped in its shuck and it's laying on its side. But normally the way you're going to fish this is you're going to fan that wing out so that it's like that. So then bottom of that deer hair is going to be that
Bring
rudder.
your hand down. Bring your hand down, Mike.
I'm sorry,
There
the
you go.
rudders. Yeah, I'm like not zoomed out enough here. That's going to be kind of the side, rudders that keep that fly afloat. So I'm going to take a bit of hair here for the wing. And again, I've done this in a few recent flies. Basically grab all these tips, and then I'm going to use a comb. I don't have a lot of static problems here. And just remove all that nasty stuff, under fur and shorter hairs. Run that comb through it a few times. And then I'm left with, this is actually, really not in too bad a shape as far as, being stacked. The tips are pretty even, but I'm going to use my hair stacker here. And oops. See, I've got a few wild hairs hanging out of that. I'll do that again. So actually, I took that out in the wrong direction. I want my wing to be forward when I tie it in. So I'm going to take those tips out of the stacker, transfer them to this hand, and then I want to measure a shank length for that wing, and then move that forward to where my thread is tied down, is waiting. And then I'll just kind of lean that forward and wrap over that hair. I've really lost that. Hang on. You do that again. Measure a shank length, bring that forward, bring it down and flare that hair. Tighten it down. Now I'm going to start working my way back and tie that hair down. Now, after I get a few good wraps, I'm going to go ahead and cut at an angle. You have a few hairs that survive, you can just pluck those away. And then sometimes if you come back toward the end there and work your way forward, you can tie those butts down. With a little bit of a tapered body there. So now with this wing, a lot of people will just stand it up like that and put a ramp in front of it. Hal has talked about this in some of his videos where that doesn't always last. So the best way to do this is to grab about a third of it. Craig Matthews actually does this too. Take about a third of it and tie through it, and then grab another third, tie through it, pull that tight. Grab another third, the last third there, and then you start to do your little thread dam. And again, with this thin thread, that's taking a little bit to do the thread dam. So now I got my wing stood up. I'm going to actually lean that forward because now I want to dub the body. I want to keep that wing out of my way. Now I'm going to come back forward to about the hook point. Let me straighten the hook a little bit here. All right. I'm back to about the hook point. Now, let's see. On this one, I'm going to I'm going to get creative. So I'll zoom out here. So I talked about this a long time ago in a dubbing presentation, but let's say I want this to be a color in between. This is my superfine dubbing here, and I have light Cahill and amber. And I really want this fly to be somewhere in between those two shades. So what I'm going to do is take some of that lighter shade and I'm going to take some of that out. And you see me dub before, just a little bit at a time. Superfine is very easy to dub with. I'm going to do about probably 2 inches of this lighter color. So there's about maybe 1.5 inches. I'll pull a little bit more off. Twisting it in the same direction. And if I want it thicker, I'll just add on top. Okay, that's about enough there of the light. Then below that, kind of tilt down here, I'm going to grab that amber color. And I'm going to start twisting that on below it. I don't want to take too much at once, trying to get in a hurry here. Do about the same amount using that amber. A little bit more up here. And that should be good. So now I'm going to take this test clip. You can take any hackle pliers or dubbing hook and just grab it right there in the center. And then I'm going to fold this over, wrap back over it. So this is kind of a dubbing loop, but I've got 2 sides to it. So now I'm going to take that test clip and I'm going to twist it. Now it's going to twist up here at the thin area, down here at the thin area. So I'm going to kind of help it here in the middle. To twist up. So basically I've got like a candy cane dubbing noodle there, or a barber pole. So now I'm going to work this back to the back of the shank. And then as I move forward, it's going to give me kind of a variegated body. I zoom in, you can't see the fly. Let me zoom in now. Basically, as I'm wrapping that forward, that's kind of giving both of those colors in there. It's giving a blend, but it's also kind of giving me a segmented body. I'm going to wrap that forward toward the eye. Here, let me go back. Let me bring my thread forward first. Now I'm going to bring it around the front, but then you see I left a space at the back here. I'm going to bring it around the back. And that kind of figure eights that wing. And then the tail end of it here will bring it right up to the eye, where I can tie that off. And then I'll go ahead and cut this away. Okay, I'll go ahead and whip finish. I went front to back on that. I want to go on the back of the eye toward the front of the eye. And then up the thread. Then I'll just grab that wing and fan it out 90 degrees. And that's a sparkle done with a variegated body. Any questions on that?
Yeah, Mike, I've never seen that dubbing technique before. That's kind of neat.
I did it in the FFI dubbing thing. I did it toward the end with like a light color and then a dark brown, just to kind of show the more variegation.
Uh-huh.
But I really like that for blending if I have two colors. Like a lot of times, you know, the colors they give you in these packs. Zoom out some. Colors they give you in these packs. Maybe I want like maybe a like a light green mixed with a yellow,
Uh-huh.
or mixed with gray or brown, whatever. And so you can even take a black with a lighter color. And to me, like some of the chenilles that you use, like this,
Mm-hmm.
that's pretty popular for like Pat's rubber legs.
Yeah.
You could take a brown dubbing and a black dubbing and twist them like that, and then you can end up with kind of your own little dubbing chenille.
Yeah.
I won't do that for the X-Caddis, but so for the next fly, I'll show you the final fly first here. And that's the X-Caddis. So focus. There we go. That wing's actually a little bit more wild than I like it. And what you can do sometimes if you're back in there, if your hair is a little bit too flared like that, sometimes you can grab it like that and just like push forward. And basically you crimp that hair a little bit and it'll lay back a little bit better like that. I kind of like it to be more laid back like that. Although, you know, like the elk hair caddis, it's intended, a caddis has kind of a tent wing, but the concept of an elk hair caddis or some of these flies is to show some movement, like the wings are fluttering, like caddis do sometimes when they're on the surface. But this is the X-Caddis. And it's basically the same thing, but you can see it's a swept back wing with that caddis head on it. What most people use for any caddis hatch is going to be the elk hair caddis, like that. It's got hackle for the you know, kind of help float it, and for the legs, and then that tent wing with that flared head like that. But the X-Caddis basically adds that trailing shuck. So For the X-Caddis, the idea actually came from Craig Matthews' wife, Jackie. When they were having trouble catching trout on the elk hair caddis, she asked if the trailing shuck improved catch rates with mayfly imitations. Why wouldn't it work for caddis as well? Caddis, they have a different metamorphosis. It's more of a caddis pupa and then the adult. But they still have a trailing shuck that they crawl out of on the surface. And again, sometimes they get stuck in it. So if there ever is a caddis hatch, the X-Caddis is going to be probably more productive than the elk hair caddis. So basically same hook, same process, but I won't do that twisted dubbing. I'll just lay down a thread base here. And any other questions? Are we good? Okay. I'll come back forward to same little piece of Antron there. I'll move it around this way. Again, a little bit longer than what I need, and I'll tie that down along the top of the shank. So I'm actually reaching this towards me. So as I wrap that thread tightly down the hook shank, it's actually putting it on the top. Now I'll cut this excess away. Now in this case, I'm going to go ahead and dub the body. I could cut that tail right now. And again, I'm going to do the same thing. You'll see a lot of them with a bluntly cut tail. But I kind of like to make it a little bit uneven. And then we're going to dub the body. I'm going to do, in this case, maybe some of this olive or olivey brown stuff here. This is brown. Another thing you can do, let's say you want kind of between brown and this amber, is you can take the two of them and just kind of card it in your hand. So like I'm taking the long fibers there, this super fine, and I'm just kind of pulling them apart. Put more brown in there and just keep pulling them apart like this. I'm too zoomed in, that's the problem. That's my habit, is to zoom in too far. But basically just kind of pull these apart, and that mixes the brown and the, maybe I want a little green in there. That's getting carried away. I'll just lay it on top and then just basically card it here, just lay it on top of each other. So this is kind of another way to mix dubbings, make the color you want. So I'm just going to take this bunch here. And again, a little bit at a time, just start twisting it on the thread. And I can go down quite a ways here because this is going to cover the whole hook shank. Need a little bit more in here. Did I hear Bill? That's fine. All right. So I'm going to work my way back to the end of the shank here. And then I'm going to dub a body here toward the front. And I got a little bit too much thing. So I'm going to go ahead and strip this off. And I want to be about at eye and a half to 2 eyes back from the eye of the hook. And I'm going to take that same deer hair, separate out a little clump here. And just grab it by the tips. Use my mustache comb here. Clean that off. It's not my normal mustache comb, so I don't have deer hair when I go to work. And then I'll take that, put it in my hair stacker. In this case, I want the hair to be pointing that way when I take it out of the stacker. And I want to measure it to be just past the bend of the hook. So right about there. And in this case, I'm going to go ahead and mark it here. That's where I want my wing to be. I'm going to grab it in these fingers and then cut it. And then, so I have just maybe a 1/16 of an inch hanging out past my fingers. Now, one way to do this, if you take your thread and zoom out a little bit more here, I'm going to take my thread and spin it in the counterclockwise as if I was looking down on it. And then I hold my hair up there. Then when my thread reaches back and grabs those tips.
Is that opening the thread up, Mike?
It's actually cording it up, but it's cording it up in. So normally when you're wrapping this way, you're putting a clockwise twist into your thread as you look, as if you were looking down on it. So a lot of times when you're, I'll do it on purpose here. A lot of times when you've wrapped forward with putting your body on and everything, you have a clockwise twist in your thread. So when you go to put your stuff on, your thread's reaching in the opposite direction. See that?
Yes,
Does that show?
I think,
So what you do is you take that bobbin then and you spin it in the counterclockwise as if you were looking down on it. And then when you grab your thread, it reaches back the opposite way.
okay.
And it'll grab over that hair, and then you can pull down and flare it. Flare it again, flare it again.
So you're doing a loose, tight wrap? Is it what you're going to?
So basically, let me do another bunch of hair here. I'm loosening the thread just enough to let it reach back there and grab those butts. I'm
How
grabbing
much hair are you taking, Mike?
that's always the question. It's often asked. Everybody gets that question, and some people say like half a pencil diameter and all this stuff, and that never means anything to me. The best thing I think it was Craig Matthews actually. He said, if you tie enough of them, you learn the right amount of hair, and it's just by feel. If you really want to count, I mean, there's maybe 30 hairs, but you it's not feasible to really count them. Al has a way where they twist the hair. I don't want to lose too much control of this, but if you twist the hair, Al, are you still on?
No, he left. He had another meeting.
Okay. If you twist the hair like that, it should be about an eye diameter. But that's not necessarily for an X-Caddis or whatever. I mean, there's different flies for different reasons and all that. But sometimes if you just hold it up there and it's like, wow, that looks too bushy, then just take a few out, and sometimes you have to restack it. That's really all I do. I hold it up there, look at it.
That's pretty much what I do too. I call it the TLAR method. That looks about right.
That looks about right. Hold it up there. If it looks right, go with it. If it looks too bulky or not enough, say I hold this up there and it's like, wow, that's too sparse. I need more hair than that. You can put it back in your stacker, put a few more hairs in there and say, okay, that looks right. So again, I'm going to go about halfway down that shuck. That gives me a little bit past. One thing with flaring hair, if you say I want it to be right at the bend of the hook, and then you flare that hair and it all goes up like this, it's not at the bend of the hook anymore. So normally for a caddis, I go a little bit past the bend of the hook like that. And then I'm going to mark that with my fingers. It's so much easier to cut the hair first and then tie it on. So again, I'm loosening the thread here. If I had it twisted the other way, when I loosen that thread, it might, let me go this way. You might reach the wrong way like that when I loosen the thread. So if I spin it counterclockwise as if I'm looking down on it, then it reaches back, grabs those tips, and then I can press down like that and flare it again. Now I'm pinching this hair the whole time so it doesn't roll around. But there's my flared head. And then I can whip finish right at the eye if you want. You can whip finish right on top of that tuft of hair. I'll do that once just to show you what I'm talking about. To me, this is more secure. If you can whip finish on the actual hook shank, that's more secure. If you come up here and you actually whip finish over the head, over that tuft, you can do that too, but there's just a little bit of give there. And if you have a strong thread, you can do that and tighten it down. I would probably do head cement if I did it around the waist right there. But if you do it around the shank, you shouldn't need head cement necessarily. If you have any extra ones, you can just kind of, I did a lot of talking and messing around with that, but that's a really good X-Caddis right there. Is 654. Does anybody want to see a trick on Comparadine?
Yeah.
We got time.
Haven't heard any no's. So I'm going to grab my micro fibbits here. So micro fibbits, again, you can see by looking at this, it's a section of a brush. You can see at the base there where it was kind of broken away from like a paintbrush kind of thing. It's nylon. These are sold. This was John Betts. tailing material. I bought it at a fly shop like that was probably in Utah, so 30 years ago, maybe. It's very, very fine stuff, like hard to see. But you take two of them. I'm going to set these on my pedestal and lay down some thread. I'm going to use actually a thread you can see a little better. I'll use this orange. I'm just going to start an eye length back and just lay down a thread base back to the back. Now I started with a really long tag here in my hand. I'm going to save that. Okay, I have this little piece of thread here. I'm going to set that down. Now I'm going to take two of those little fibers. I guess maybe in the light you can see those a little bit. There's two. All right. I'm going to take two of these, and probably in the camera would be the best way to see if they're lined up or not. I'm working so far away. On mayfly tails like this, when I'm using microfivets, I like to use them really long. When they splay out, they don't really show up, but they do help support the fly and float it. So I'll often go like at least a shank and a half, or like a hook and a half, or two hooks of tail. So I'm going to tie this in at the end here. Again, I'm reaching forward, so I'm going to spin it this way and reach back. And now I'm going to just wrap forward. I don't really care. It's kind of going with the thread there. I'm going to cut those off anyway. The butts. So now what I have here, if I'll zoom in, okay, what I have here on the tail now is two of those little fibers tied in. If you take your thumbnail and just kind of press against that, you get them to stand up and kind of split apart a little bit, right? You can kind of see how they're split apart. Now, if you take that piece of thread and put it around the hook like this and fold it. So now I have it wrapped around the hook, and bring it in between those two microfit. Whoops, slipped it too. I pulled it too hard. Do that again.
You can do the same trick with biots too.
Yep. Fold that thread and then bring it up between the two. Don't pull too hard. And then take your thread and just wrap over that. Maybe two or three good, just kind of decent turns. So now I have it split like that. If it was like too tight, I could just pull on that thread and that'll spread them a little farther. But as long as I have that nice and tight, like it is now, see how that pulled it a little bit farther? As long as I have it in between those two, that's always going to stay separated. And now I can wrap that forward, cut this away, and now I have those tails split apart. They'll always stay split apart. When you put them in a fly box, You know, they're up against other flies and everything. And a lot of times you'll pull one out and it's got these little microfibbits and they're just stuck together. But if you put that thread in between the back of it, they can't come together. So then again, you dub the body, you'd put on the wing. Everybody learned enough about the X-Caddis and the sparkle dun.